Tonight, you are not just here to sleep. You are here to fall through the cracks in your own mind. You are about to enter a place where decisions dissolve, memories betray, and even your own reflection might slip from your grasp. A place where illusions do not merely trick your senses, they unravel your very sense of existence. For the next 2 hours, you will journey through paradoxes that twist logic until it bleeds, traps that tighten every time you try to escape, and questions that erase the answers you thought you had. You won't know when you cross the line. You won't remember when you stopped being certain of who you are, and that's exactly the point. This is a descent, not into chaos, but into a deeper understanding that what you think is real, solid, and true is often nothing more than a beautifully crafted illusion. Close your eyes, loosen your grip on the world, and get ready to fall, gently, endlessly, into the mind-bending illusions and cognitive traps that have been waiting for you all along. Your journey begins now. There is a strange phenomenon that few notice until it is too late. You are faced with a choice, a real one. You feel the tension, the weight. You agonize over it, weighing possibilities, worrying about consequences. You reach deep into yourself, summon every piece of wisdom and fear you have gathered, and finally, with trembling certainty, you choose, and then, almost instantly, the choice vanishes, not just from the world, but from your memory of what could have been. It's as if the other path, the one you almost took, crumbles into dust the moment you turn away. It doesn't linger as an open door. It doesn't wait patiently for you to change your mind. It erases itself. The paradox strikes quietly. You think you chose between two futures, but in truth, the moment you choose, only one ever existed. The other is swallowed whole, leaving behind nothing but the faintest shadow of what might have been. And the deeper question is worse. Did you really choose at all? Or did reality only ever offer you one option, draped in the illusion of two? Because it knew that the moment you acted, the other would cease to have ever been real. Imagine it. You stand at a forked road. Two paths wind into the mist. One to the left, one to the right. You take a trembling step right, and instantly, the left path folds in on itself, the mist swallowing it, rewriting the past so thoroughly that it becomes unclear whether it was ever there at all. You begin to wonder, was there ever truly a choice? Or was the illusion of choice the only thing you were ever meant to experience? This is the trap of existence. We believe in infinite possibilities until the moment we act. Action collapses the universe. It erases dreams, rewrites memory, reshapes reality into a single merciless thread, and we are left not standing between futures, but trapped inside the only one that was ever permitted to survive. The danger of this paradox isn't just existential, it gnaws at the very foundation of identity. Because if every choice erases all other possibilities, then who are you really? Are you the sum of the choices you made, or the residue of the choices you never truly had? Think back to the biggest decisions of your life: changing jobs, ending relationships, choosing where to live, who to trust, what to believe. You may remember feeling torn, standing in a swirl of possibility. But when you look back now, does it really feel like you could have chosen differently? Or does it feel inevitable? As if all the debating, all the struggling, all the pain was just the slow realization that you had no other path but this one. Maybe that's what free will is. Not the power to create multiple realities, but the fragile comfort of pretending we could have. And maybe the real illusion is not the choice itself, but the idea that choice was ever real at all. There's something deeply haunting about this realization, because it means regret is hollow. It means nostalgia is a ghost. It means the you that wonders what if is chasing after shadows that were already dead before you even moved. The universe, it seems, does not keep museum exhibits of your lost futures. It devours them the moment you look away, and you too are devoured. Not by punishment, not by malice, but by the simple, merciless unfolding of a reality that never promised to keep your dreams alive. If you ever find yourself hesitating, if you ever feel the cold terror of making the wrong decision, pause. Ask yourself, am I truly choosing, or am I simply moving toward the only future that ever truly existed for me? And more importantly, am I mourning a path that was never really mine? Because maybe peace is not found in making the right choice. Maybe peace is found in understanding that whatever choice you make, the moment you move, the road you leave behind ceases to exist. It dissolves not just from the world, but from your very soul, leaving only the path under your feet and the footsteps you must continue to make, one after the other, into a future that was waiting for you all along. You would think that the present, this fleeting, vivid moment you are living right now, would always feel more real than a memory. The present is sharp. It breathes. It presses against your skin. Surely, nothing from the past could ever be stronger than the immediacy of now. But the mind plays a far crueler trick. There are memories that feel heavier, sharper, more real than anything the current moment can offer. A childhood afternoon where the sun burned golden into your eyes, a goodbye you never really survived, a fleeting touch from someone you once thought you would never lose. These memories do not fade with time. They sharpen. They carve themselves deeper into you until the living, breathing now feels thin, pale, ghost-like in comparison. The paradox is merciless. The past, which should be dying, sometimes lives more fiercely inside you than the present. Moment you are struggling to survive, it is as if your mind, desperate to make sense of everything that slipped away, reanimates the past into something stronger than life itself. The present becomes an echo, while the memory becomes a fortress you cannot leave. And so you find yourself trapped, not in time, but in perception. You are here, technically, but the you that truly matters lives back there, in a moment you can never touch again. Scientists would tell you that memory is fragile, inaccurate, easily distorted, but try telling that to the part of you that still feels the ache of a loss as if it happened this morning. Try explaining that to the part of you that can still smell the rain from a night 20 years ago. Your mind doesn't care about facts. It cares about gravity, about emotional mass. And some memories grow so heavy that they collapse the fabric of now, pulling everything toward themselves. The danger is subtle at first. You begin to prefer the memory to the moment. You retreat into it, not because you are nostalgic, but because reality itself seems thinner, less trustworthy. The present is too fragile. The memory is solid, carved in grief and longing, and so you drift. Each step you take today feels less certain, less anchored, as you slowly become a ghost haunting your own life, always staring backward through the veil. This paradox forces a brutal question. If the memory feels more real than the moment, which one is truly your life? Is it the breath you take now, shallow and uncertain, or the breath you took then, when you still believed in tomorrow? If the past feels more alive inside you than the present feels outside you, then are you alive now? Or are you only remembering how to be alive? The danger grows the longer you linger. Because memories that feel more real than the present are not just souvenirs. They are anchors. They pin you to moments you cannot change, to loves you cannot reclaim, to mistakes you cannot undo, and every step forward stretches you thinner and thinner, until one day you are nothing but a tethered echo, half here, half there, never whole in either world. If you ever feel that pull, if you ever catch yourself clinging harder to a memory than to a moment unfolding before you, pause. Ask yourself, am I honoring the past or am I abandoning the present? Am I cherishing what was or am I refusing to live what is? Because memory is a gift, but it is also a trap. It offers comfort when the world becomes too sharp. It offers shelter when the future grows too uncertain. But it also offers the sweetest, most silent death. The death of now. The memory that is more real than the moment is not just a betrayal of time. It is a betrayal of yourself. Because no matter how brightly the past shines, no matter how fiercely it burns behind your eyes, you cannot live backward. You can only live here, in this breath, in this heartbeat, in this messy, uncertain, imperfect now. And maybe that's the final cruel truth. The memory feels more real because it is frozen, perfect, polished, untouchable. The moment feels thin because it is alive, unfolding, unpredictable, vulnerable. And life, real life, is always thinner, always riskier, always more fragile than the illusions memory can create. But it is also the only thing that can still change, the only thing that can still grow, the only thing that can still save you. There are some thoughts so elusive, so slippery, that the very act of thinking them changes them. You reach for them with the clarity of a question, but the moment you wrap your mind around them, they bend, shift, distort, and by the time you've understood them, you haven't, because the thought that arrives is not the same one you tried to grasp. It's as if the thought sees you coming, and the moment you make contact, it rearranges itself in your mind's grasp, just enough to become something else entirely. This is no ordinary confusion. It's not a lack of intelligence or insight. It's a paradox baked into the structure of consciousness itself. The observer changes the observed, even when the observed is your own thought. You think you're analyzing an idea. In truth, the idea is reacting to being analyzed, and so it slips out of reach. This is not imagination. This is a real cognitive trap. A loop. You're caught in the act of chasing something that cannot exist in a stable form once you notice it. Consider the experience of trying to understand your own motives. You reflect. Why did I say that? Why do I feel this way? You think you've landed on the truth. It's because I was scared. It's because I needed love. It's because I was angry. But almost immediately, those answers begin to unravel. You start to doubt them, not because they're false, but because your awareness of them changes how they live inside you. What was once subconscious is now conscious, and that shift alters its shape. You can't see the original intention anymore, only the footprint it left behind. You try to reimagine it, but now your memory is contaminated by your reflection. You think you're tracing the thought, but you're really tracing a copy of a copy of a copy, each one less faithful to the original than the last. This is the paradox of inner perception. The more you try to see it clearly, the more distorted it becomes. It is like trying to stare directly into your own eyes without a mirror. It is like trying to remember the exact moment a dream became a nightmare. There is no stable object to find, because your mind, by looking, changes what it sees. And this isn't limited to personal thoughts. It extends to philosophy, creativity, self-awareness. Artists often speak of inspiration that arrives pure and whole, but the moment they try to capture it, it dissolves. Writers chase the perfect sentence, but by the time they finish writing it, they realize it no longer matches the glowing vision that sparked it. And the same happens in moments of epiphany. You feel the surge of understanding. You say, "I've finally seen it," but try to explain it, even to yourself, and the clarity collapses. It becomes a shadow of what it once was. And maybe this isn't a failure. Maybe this is the cost of consciousness, because your mind is not a mirror. It is a participant. It cannot separate itself from what it examines. It cannot touch without leaving fingerprints. And the deepest, most essential thoughts, the ones that shape who you are, the ones that whisper behind every decision, every fear, every desire, are the most sensitive to this interference. They resist being caught. They recoil from the light of full awareness. And so, the closer you get to understanding yourself, the more you risk changing the very thing you're trying to understand. You cannot think the thought without reshaping it. You cannot examine yourself without affecting what you find. This is the cognitive trap. You are both the hunter and the hunted. You are both the thinker and the thought, and neither one can ever fully see the other without distortion. If you ever feel like you're going in circles, if every attempt to understand yourself leaves you more confused, pause. Ask yourself, am I chasing a thought I can never fully catch? Am I changing it every time I try to grasp it? And if so, what does it mean to know anything about myself at all? Because maybe the truth of who you are can never be pinned down in a sentence or a journal entry, or even a lifetime of self-reflection. Maybe it can only be glimpsed, briefly, beautifully, in the spaces between thoughts, before the spotlight turns on, before the trap is sprung. Maybe the most honest thing you can do is to sit quietly with the thought and let it exist, unhunted, unexplained, unfolding in the dark. You set out to escape, to find something new, to move forward, away from what you once were, toward who you might become. You walk with purpose, maybe even with desperation, down a road that promises distance from your pain, your past, your patterns. But then, something strange happens. The farther you walk, the more familiar everything becomes. The landmarks aren't new. The faces you pass feel like memories. The weight in your chest returns. Not because you carried it with you, but because the road gave it back. And suddenly, without understanding how, you're back at the beginning. Except this time, the beginning knows you've tried to leave. It knows the shape of your footsteps. It knows exactly how you break. You didn't return. You were never gone. The paradox collapses time and intent. The road promised to take you somewhere else, but it was always a loop, one that began after you returned, and the more earnestly you try to escape, the faster you come back. This isn't metaphor, it's a map of the human mind, because this road lives inside you. It's the path you take when you're running from yourself. The way out becomes the way in. You try to outrun regret, but find yourself replaying it. You try to become someone new, but carry the same voice, the same patterns, the same invisible cage made of memory. You think you're changing, but the road is made of mirrors, and every step forward is another version of the same old reflection. You've met this part of yourself before, in different clothes, under a different name, but the same ghost behind the eyes. It's the loop of growth that never really grows, the cycle of leaving without ever truly letting go. And you begin to suspect something terrible. Maybe the road isn't broken. Maybe you are. Maybe your compass always points home, even when home is the thing that hurt you. This is the cruel illusion of escape. The more you seek transformation, the more the road demands you confront repetition, not to punish you, but to ask the question you keep avoiding. What are you really running from? Is it a place, a person, a version of yourself you can't bear to sit with? The paradox isn't that the road leads you back. It's that it starts from the part of you that never left. Because until you face the center, the original wound, the original fear, the original belief that you're unworthy of peace, every road leads back to it. Not because you failed, but because you were walking in a spiral, disguised as a straight line. Even the world reflects this truth. Addictions, habits, cycles of blame, toxic relationships that masquerade as lessons but are really just mirrors you haven't learned to look into yet. You try again, you change jobs, you move cities, you burn bridges, but somehow the same weight finds you. The same arguments rise. The same emptiness greets you on the other side of each choice. And so the road folds again. Softly, silently, until you're walking the same path, in a new disguise. It's enough to make you question everything. If every step leads back to where you began, then what's the point of walking at all? But maybe that's where the road changes. Not when you run faster, not when you push harder, but when you stop. When you look around at the familiar terrain and say, I know this place. I've been here before, and this time, I will not keep walking blindly. You sit, you feel, you face the ache that chased you, and something shifts, not outside, but within. Because the loop only continues when you refuse to feel the thing you keep avoiding. Once you do, the road doesn't disappear, but it unfolds into something unfamiliar, something real. A path that doesn't promise escape, but offers presence. And in that presence you find something you never expected. You were never trying to get away. You were trying to come home. Not to the place you left, but to the self you buried beneath miles of forgetting. There's a kind of answer that lives quietly inside a question. Not loud, not obvious, but breathing just beneath the surface. You can feel it in the moments before understanding, in the pause before certainty forms, like a name you almost remember or a solution on the tip of your tongue. And then you get it. The answer arrives, clear, undeniable, final. But something strange happens the moment it lands. It begins to fade. The mystery is solved, but the thrill is gone. The depth evaporates. What once felt profound is suddenly simple, too simple. And then the thought arrives. Was the answer ever real? Or was it only alive when I didn't know it? This is the paradox of knowing. The answer was meaningful only because it was hidden. Once revealed, it loses the magic that made it worth chasing. It collapses under its own exposure. It becomes small, almost hollow. As if what you were searching for wasn't the answer at all, but the not knowing that made the search feel alive. The brain loves resolution, but the soul thrives in the tension of mystery. Before the answer, your mind burns. You wonder, you reach, you imagine. You stretch towards something greater than yourself. After the answer, the flame dims. You stop reaching. You stop wondering. The unknown is gone. And with it, a piece of what made the world feel wide and full of possibility. This paradox shows itself in subtle, devastating ways. Think of all the things you once longed to understand. The questions that haunted you. Why did they leave? What am I meant to do with my life? What is the meaning of this pain? then think about the moment when clarity finally came. Yes, there may have been relief. Yes, there may have been closure, but wasn't there also a strange emptiness? A silence where the ache used to live, as if the mystery, once removed, took part of you with it. It's why some people stay in confusion longer than they need to, not out of weakness, but because the mystery feels more meaningful than the truth. It's why others keep asking questions they already know the answers to. Because they miss the feeling of not knowing. Because the not knowing held something sacred. In science, this paradox is known too. The moment a mystery is explained, how an illusion works, how a star collapses, how a mind breaks, a piece of its beauty vanishes. You no longer see the wonder, you only see the mechanics. And while the knowledge is valuable, the awe has fled. Even love behaves like this. You chase someone full of fantasy. You project meaning onto their silence, their glance, their distance. And when you finally get them, when you understand their patterns, their wounds, their limits, something shifts. Not always badly, but undeniably. The answer arrives, and with it, the end of the mystery. The unknown dies, and sometimes part of your desire dies with it. The danger of this paradox is that it leads us to a quiet grief, not over what we lost, but over what we used to not know. Because there's a kind of magic in the open-ended, a sense of vastness that can't survive definition. But we are definition-hungry creatures. We chase answers like lifelines, and then we mourn them once they arrive. If you ever find yourself aching after a revelation, if you feel emptier after gaining clarity, not fuller, pause. Ask yourself, was it the answer I truly wanted, or was it the journey toward it that gave me meaning? And if the answer only felt alive while I was searching, what does that say about the way I measure truth? Maybe we were never meant to own answers. Maybe we're only meant to touch them, briefly, like fireflies glowing for a moment in the dark. Maybe the real purpose of the question was not to be resolved, but to wake you up, to stir your soul, to remind you how vast the unknown really is. And maybe, just maybe, the greatest answers are the ones we never fully grasp. The ones that keep asking back. You make choices every day. Big ones, small ones, silent ones. Some feel monumental, changing your path forever. Others seem invisible, casual, made without a second thought. But what if every choice you've ever made didn't just alter your path? What if it fractured you? What if, with every decision, another version of you broke off and walked the other road? One version turned left, one turned right, one said yes, one said no, one stayed, one ran, and each of those selves kept going, living lives you'll never know, loving people you'll never meet, becoming versions of you that feel as real as the one you're living now, just out of reach. This is the paradox. The self does not grow stronger through decision. It splits. Every choice is a cut, a separation, a new universe, where another you unfolds in silence. It's not just a metaphor. In theoretical physics, some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest exactly this, that every time a particle makes a choice, the universe splits, to allow both outcomes to unfold. Apply that logic to you and suddenly, you're not one self walking a single road. You're a constellation of selves scattered across a vast landscape of possibility. Somewhere, there's a version of you who took that job. Another who never said what needed to be said. Another who stayed silent when you finally shouted. Another who loved differently, ran sooner, forgave too late. You think you are you, the product of your past and your plans, but that's only one narrative among countless others. You are the sum of the choices you kept. But what about the choices that didn't keep you? The terrifying part is not that these versions might exist. The terrifying part is how close you sometimes feel to them. That moment when you walk into a room and feel completely alien to your own life. That passing thought, this doesn't feel like my story. The dream you wake from that lingers longer than it should, whispering of a life you never lived but somehow remember. These are fractures, echoes of other selves brushing up against the edges of your awareness. And it begs the question, which version of you is the real one? The you that made the choice? The you that almost did? Or the one that still wonders what would have happened if you hadn't? Each choice feels like a narrowing, a closing off of other lives, other versions of who you could have become. But instead of clarity, you're left with a shadow of all the lives you didn't get to live. And the haunting suspicion that somewhere they're still being lived without you. The deeper trap of this paradox is identity itself. You think of yourself as a single being, with a story that makes sense, with a center that holds. But if every choice splits you, then what is the self? Is it the branch you're standing on now? Or is it the entire tree? Branches tangled in decisions never made. This isn't just philosophy. This is grief. Because every time you choose, you lose. Not because you chose wrongly, but because you abandoned an entire universe. And you feel it in those quiet hours when memory plays its cruelest games. The sense that a piece of you is missing. Not because it was taken, but because you walked away from it. But maybe the point isn't to reclaim those lost versions. Maybe the point is to recognize that yourself is not a single thread. It's a web. You are not one identity. You are a chorus of possibilities, an echo chamber of every version that could have been, and the you that exists now. You are the one carrying the weight of all the ones that don't. That's why life feels so heavy sometimes, not because of what happened, but because of everything that almost did. If you ever feel like you're drifting, like something inside you split long ago, pause. Ask yourself, which version of me did I leave behind? And is it still calling to me? Because maybe the self doesn't just grow, maybe it fragments, and maybe healing isn't about becoming whole again, but about learning how to live as a mosaic of all your nearly selves. Maybe you don't need to find yourself. Maybe you are not lost. Maybe you're simply listening to the soft voices of the lives you could have lived, echoing through the silence of the one you chose. You set out with a map in your hand, confident that you know the way. The destination is marked. The route is clear. The world seems navigable, understandable, safe. But the farther you travel, the more things begin to shift. Paths twist that once seemed straight. Landmarks disappear. Directions become suspect. The lines that once made perfect sense now lead you in circles, or into dead ends, or toward places you swear were never drawn in the first place. You check the map again. It has changed, not subtly, not like you missed a detail, but fundamentally. Rivers have moved, mountains have appeared, entire cities have vanished from where they were supposed to be. The paradox is brutal. The moment you begin to follow the map rewrites itself. The tool you trusted to guide you becomes the very thing that betrays you. And it forces a deeper, more frightening realization. Maybe the map was never a map of the world at all. Maybe it was always a map of you, and you are changing, moment by moment, step by step, and the world around you bends to match. This is not just fantasy. This is how dreams behave. This is how memory behaves. This is how the mind, in its desperate attempt to impose order on chaos, constantly rewrites reality to fit the shape of expectation and fear. We believe we are navigating a stable world, but often we are navigating the shifting terrain of ourselves. And because we are never the same person from one moment to the next, the map we hold, the guide we trust, becomes outdated with every breath we take. The future is not a place waiting to be reached. It is a landscape waiting to be invented. And every step you take invents it anew. This is why plans crumble, why 5-year goals dissolve into dust, why dreams that once burned bright turn strange and empty when you finally approach them. Because the map you made, the map that made perfect sense to the person you used to be, no longer matches the person you have become. You can cling to it, stubbornly. You can try to force your way down roads that no longer exist. But all you'll find is frustration, alienation, a growing gnawing sense that somehow the world itself has betrayed you, when in truth, it is you who have outgrown the world you once imagined. The tragedy is not that the map is wrong. The tragedy is that you needed it to be right. You needed the comfort of a fixed path, a fixed outcome. You needed to believe that certainty was possible, but certainty was never the deal. The deal was movement, change, discovery. The deal was that the only true map would be drawn step by trembling step, etched not on paper, but into the shifting dust of your own becoming. If you ever find yourself lost, if you ever feel betrayed by the plans you once trusted, pause. Ask yourself, is the map wrong? Or have I changed? Am I mourning the loss of a destination, or the loss of the person who once needed to reach it? Because maybe getting lost is not failure. Maybe it is the first honest thing you've done in a long time. Maybe the point was never to reach the X on the map. Maybe the point was to become someone who no longer needs a map at all. Someone who can trust the feeling of the ground beneath their feet, even when the path dissolves. Someone who can move forward, even when the world refuses to stay still. Someone who can live without needing every step to be drawn in advance. The map that changed after you started following it teaches us something terrifying and beautiful. That the journey is not about following, it is about creating. That certainty is a comfort reserved for those who have stopped growing. And that to live, truly live, is to walk roads that were never meant to be charted. Roads that move when you move. Worlds that grow when you dare to step forward. Not because you know the way, but because you are brave enough to walk without one. Desire should be simple. You want something. You strive toward it. You achieve it. And the want dissolves, leaving behind satisfaction, relief, peace. But it rarely works that way, does it? Sometimes, the moment you finally grasp what you've longed for, the thing you thought would quiet the hunger, something strange happens instead. The desire grows stronger, not weaker, not resolved, stronger. The paradox is vicious. You believed fulfillment would end the craving, but fulfillment sharpened it, fed it, made it hungrier. It's like giving water to a thirst that only multiplies with every sip, like feeding a fire that only blazes hotter with every log you throw in. You reach the summit, and suddenly you see higher peaks. You win the affection you craved, and suddenly you fear its loss more than you ever feared its absence. You acquire the status, the title, the validation, and somehow the empty place inside you only grows. Why? Because sometimes desire is not about the object, it's about the motion, the reaching, the hungering. the endless grasp towards something just beyond you. You thought you were chasing the object, but you were chasing the chase itself. And once the object is caught, the engine of longing doesn't shut down. It lurches forward, disoriented, desperate for something new to pursue. You become addicted not to the thing, but to the state of wanting. You build your identity around lack, around pursuit, around the ache of the almost. And when the ache disappears, you feel unmoored. Who are you without the hunger? Who are you without the striving? And so, unconsciously, you reignite the fire. You inflate the next desire. You move the goalposts just far enough away to stay unsatisfied. Not because you failed, but because part of you doesn't know how to exist without yearning. The trap of this paradox is subtle and devastating. It convinces you that satisfaction is always just one more achievement away, one more lover, one more title, one more dream fulfilled, and so you live always on the edge of arrival, never truly arriving. You are forever chasing the horizon, never noticing that the horizon moves as you move, that it was never a destination, but a condition, a trick of perception baked into the architecture of desire itself. If you ever feel restless even after you get what you wanted, if you feel the gnawing ache immediately returning, stronger, sharper, more insatiable than before, pause. Ask yourself, what am I really trying to satisfy? Is it the hunger for the thing? Or the hunger for the hunger itself? Because maybe the true object of your desire isn't love, or power, or recognition. Maybe it's motion. Maybe it's the sweet, torturous aliveness of wanting something you don't yet have. And if that's true, then fulfillment will always taste like ash. Because it is not the having that thrills you. It is the needing. This paradox explains why so many who have it all still spiral into despair. Why empires fall. Why lovers turn cold. Why success so often leaves behind a hollow echo instead of triumph. It's not because they failed to get what they wanted. It's because they succeeded. And the success revealed that the real hunger was never for the thing. It was for the chase. And the chase can never end. Unless you step off the wheel, unless you realize that the only desire worth pursuing is the desire to want less. Not because ambition is evil, not because dreams are wrong, but because endless wanting, unquestioned, automatic, frantic, will devour you from the inside. Desire, like fire, can warm you or consume you. It depends on whether you tend it or feed it blindly. The desire that grew stronger, once satisfied, reminds us that happiness is not about getting what you want. It's about learning to recognize when wanting itself is the addiction. It's about choosing, deliberately, what hungers you will honor and what hungers you will let go. Because the deepest peace comes not from endless reaching. It comes from learning how to sit, empty-handed, with a heart still burning. But not burning you alive. We imagine the future constantly. We plan it, visualize it, predict it, control it. We tell ourselves that by thinking ahead, by naming what's coming, we give ourselves power over what lies beyond the present. But sometimes, the moment you name the future, it dies. You say, I know what's going to happen. And the universe twists slightly, subtly, just enough to make sure it doesn't. This is the paradox. The very act of predicting the future alters it. And sometimes, it erases the very future you were trying to secure. You envision yourself getting the job, so you walk in confident, relaxed, too relaxed. You sabotage the moment you thought you'd mastered. You say, they'll never leave me. and you stop trying. You stop showing up, stop being present, and suddenly they're gone. It's not because your prediction was wrong. It's because your belief in it changed your behavior, and that change collapsed the very outcome you were counting on. It's a cognitive trap built into the machinery of expectation, one where certainty becomes the seed of failure. And it doesn't just apply to personal moments. It echoes through society, history, culture. Economists predict a market crash, and the panic triggered by the prediction causes the very crash they feared. Someone says, that candidate will win in a landslide, and their supporters grow, complacent, stay home, and the loss becomes a surprise that should have never happened. The future is not a photograph waiting to develop. It is a trembling equation, sensitive to every breath, every word, every assumption. And the more certain you are of its shape, the more likely you are to distort it. You are not a passive observer of what's coming. You are an active ingredient in the recipe of reality. And your predictions, your thoughts, your expectations, your fears are not harmless guesses. They are interventions. This creates a cruel dilemma. To prepare for the future, you must imagine it. But in imagining it, you change it. And the closer you get to naming it perfectly, the more pressure you put on it to become something else. It's like chasing a reflection across water. The faster you move, the more the image shatters. The paradox isn't just frustrating, it's destabilizing, because it means you can't ever truly know what's coming, not because the future is random, but because you're part of it. And that makes you both the predictor and the cause of the prediction's failure. If you ever feel anxious about what's ahead, if you try to control it by forecasting it, scripting it, sealing it in words, pause. Ask yourself, am I preparing or am I interfering? Am I imagining what's coming, or am I quietly deciding it can only happen the way I say it will? Because the moment you think, this is how it must be, you begin pushing away all the quiet, unexpected, miraculous ways it could have been instead. You kill futures without realizing it. You trap possibility under the weight of your imagination. It's not your fault. It's how the mind survives, by turning uncertainty into prediction. But maybe survival isn't the same as living. Maybe real life is found in the futures you never see coming. The ones that breathe freely, unwatched, unforced, unwritten. The ones that rise like unexpected weather, not from control, but from surrender. The future that collapsed. When you predicted it reminds us, there's power in envisioning the path ahead, but there's also danger in holding too tightly to it, because the future is not a promise. It's a relationship. And like all relationships, it needs space to breathe, to change, to surprise you. So think ahead, hope, dream, but hold it loosely. And when you find yourself trying to force what's next into a box shaped by your certainty, remember that the future you need most might be the one your prediction never saw coming. Fear is supposed to be a warning, a signal, a glimpse of a danger you still have time to avoid. But sometimes, fear doesn't protect you. It creates the very thing you were trying to escape. This is the paradox. Some fears only become real because you believed in them so deeply, you helped bring them to life. You're afraid someone will leave you, so you cling. You question them constantly. You read too far into silences. You act from desperation instead of trust. And in time, they do leave. Not because they wanted to, but because fear poisoned the connection before it had a chance to grow. You fear failure, so you hesitate. You avoid risks. You play small. You second-guess your own ability until your doubt becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the failure you feared finds you, not because you weren't good enough, but because fear convinced you that you weren't. This is not just emotion, it's cognitive architecture. The brain is wired to anticipate threats and to act on those threats as if they are already true. Not because they are, but because the cost of ignoring a real danger is far higher than the cost of responding to a false one. So you act, you react, you build walls before anyone gets close. You burn bridges before they can collapse. You avoid trying so you never have to fail. And in doing so, you carve your fears into reality with your own hands. The danger wasn't real until you treated it like it was. This isn't just tragic, it's recursive. Because when your fear becomes real, you say, "See, I was right to be afraid." And that confirmation makes the next fear even harder to challenge. You begin to trust your fear more than your potential, more than your memory, more than the people around you. Fear becomes your compass, and it only ever points toward isolation, contraction, and retreat. The more you follow it, the more your world shrinks, and yet you feel justified because every outcome proves your fear right. You never see that your belief is what built it, that your fear wasn't a window, it was a blueprint, and you followed it step by step. This paradox becomes especially brutal when applied to identity. You fear you're unlovable, so you act distant, defensive, unpredictable, and people pull away. You fear you'll never be enough, so you overcompensate, burn yourself out, and eventually collapse under pressure. When it happens, you nod bitterly. I knew this would happen. But what if your belief didn't just predict the outcome? What if it created it? If you ever feel trapped by a repeating pattern, if it seems like your life keeps proving your worst fears right, pause. Ask yourself, am I seeing a truth about the world? Or am I watching my fears become reality because I expected them to? Because fear is not just a feeling, it's a lens. It distorts everything you look at. It finds shadows where there's only light. It creates distance where there could have been connection. And the more you trust it, the more it shapes the world in its own image. But there's another possibility, a brutal, liberating truth. If fear can invent reality, then maybe courage can too. Maybe the moment you begin to act as if you are safe, you become safer. Maybe when you risk trust, you teach others how to trust you back. Maybe when you walk toward the thing you were taught to run from, you collapse the illusion that made it powerful in the first place. It's not about being fearless. That's a fantasy. It's about being aware that fear is often not the fire, but the spark, and you are the one holding the match. The fear that became true, only because you believed. It is a quiet warning that your life can become a shrine to your imagination, and not always the hopeful kind. That your mind is powerful enough to build prisons out of possibility. But it also means this: you are not trapped, not really. You are just standing in a room made of your own blueprints, and you are still holding the pen. There are thoughts that enter your mind that feel foreign. Words that echo inside you, shaped in your tone, but not in your truth. They sound like you. They move like your inner monologue. But when you stop and listen closely, something feels off. You ask yourself, did I really believe that? Where did that voice come from? It's not your logic, not your desire, not your wisdom. It's something older, something absorbed, something implanted. And yet, it speaks through you as if it were yours. This is the paradox. Sometimes, the loudest voice in your mind belongs to a version of you that never actually existed. A self shaped by other people's expectations, a persona carved by years of correction, suggestion, punishment, praise. You never chose it, but it speaks anyway, as if it knows you better than you know yourself. Maybe it's the voice that tells you not to try, that you'll fail, that you always fail. Maybe it's the voice that tells you you're too much, or not enough, or both at once. Maybe it's the voice that whispers judgment the moment you feel joy, reminding you that you haven't earned it, that you should be doing something else, that happiness must be traded for guilt. And the terrifying thing, you trust it, because it's in you, because it sounds like your own voice. But that's the trap. It isn't you. It's a ghost of a possible self. One you were shaped to believe in, but never chose to become. And the more you listen to it, the more you begin to act from its logic. You make decisions based on its fears. You build relationships based on its needs. You limit your growth based on its insecurities. Until, over time, you begin to live out the life that voice predicts, not because it was right, but because you stopped questioning where it came from. This isn't just psychological, it's neurological. The brain forms patterns, associations, shortcuts, based on repetition. If you hear something enough times, especially when young, you don't just remember it. You internalize it. It becomes part of the scaffold your identity is built on. And so a single comment, "You're not the smart one," or "You're hard to love," or "You never follow through," can echo for decades, forming the foundation for a self that was never truly you. A self that you spend years trying to fix, when maybe it was never yours to begin with. Tragedy of this paradox isn't that we hear voices that aren't ours. It's that we mistake them for who we are. We carry them like scars and call it identity. We obey them like commandments and call it self-discipline. We perform them like roles and call it personality. And slowly, painfully, the real self, the one that existed before the voices, fades into silence. But it never truly dies. It lingers beneath the static, waiting, and sometimes, in rare moments of stillness, a moment of play, of love, of creative flow, it speaks, softly, not with judgment, not with fear, but with recognition. This is me. This is what I sound like. And for a fleeting moment, you remember, you are not your thoughts. You are the space beneath them. You are not the voice in your head. You are the awareness listening. If you ever feel like you're haunted by your own mind, if your inner dialogue feels cruel or repetitive or strangely impersonal, pause. Ask yourself, whose voice is this really? Is this me? Or a ghost I've been rehearsing so long I forgot how to exorcise it? Because once you ask that question, the spell breaks. The voice may still speak, but it loses its authority. You can listen without obeying. You can observe without identifying. And slowly, you begin to clear space for the self you were always meant to become. Not the version molded by others' fears, not the version praised for being small, safe, predictable, but the self that grows in the light of your own choosing. The voice that echoed from a self you never were is a quiet reminder that becoming who you are sometimes begins with unlearning who you never were. You see the trick. You understand it. You've lifted the curtain, exposed the wires, unraveled the mechanism, and yet, it still works. The illusion continues. Even with full awareness, even after you've said, "This isn't real," your body reacts, your emotions respond, your mind flinches, as if the lie were still truth. this is the paradox. Some illusions do not end when you uncover them. They continue to control you, despite your awareness, despite your logic, despite your clarity. It's like watching a magician reveal how the trick is done, and still feeling awe when he does it again. It's like knowing the mirror distorts your body, but still hating the way you look in it. It's like knowing that the voice in your head is your inner critic, and still believing what it says, because some illusions are not just mental, they're emotional, physiological, conditioned, and truth on its own is not always enough to undo them. You can know that you are safe and still feel afraid. You can know that you are loved and still feel unworthy. You can know the relationship is over and still wait for the door to open again. And this dissonance begins to haunt you, because now you are not just hurting, you are ashamed of the fact that you're still hurting. You are aware of the illusion, but trapped in it anyway. This creates a cruel double bind. The more clearly you see the lie, the more painful it is to still believe it. It would almost be easier to be fully deceived, to live in ignorance, to not know how deeply the illusion grips you. But you know, and it still grips. Why? Because some illusions don't live in your mind. They live in your wiring, your nervous system, your emotional memory. They are not thoughts, they are imprints, and imprints do not vanish just because the story changes. They must be rewritten, gently, repeatedly, from the inside out. This paradox teaches us something we don't want to admit. Knowing the truth is not the same as being free from the lie. You can dissect the illusion. You can name it, understand it, break it down, and it will still pull you like gravity. Because illusions are not based in logic. They are based in repetition, and repetition builds truth, even false ones. This is why people return to relationships they know are unhealthy, why they relapse into beliefs they've outgrown, why they sabotage progress they consciously want to make. They are not confused. They are conditioned, and conditioning isn't undone by a single insight. It is undone by retraining the self to live inside a new truth. Not once, but over and over. If you ever feel like you've outsmarted the lie, but still feel its grip, pause. Ask yourself, what part of me still believes this, even though I no longer do? What wound still lives in me so deeply that it echoes even after I've stopped calling its name? Because healing is not a single moment. It is a slow, deliberate untangling, not just of ideas, but of emotional reflexes. To stop believing an illusion isn't to be cured. It is to begin the hard work of behaving as if you no longer believe it, until your body, your habits, your reactions begin to believe it too. The illusion that persisted, even after you knew it was false, is not a failure. It is a rite of passage, a reminder that liberation is not the end of illusion. It is learning to live clearly within it, to feel the tug of the lie and still choose truth, to hear the voice of the old pattern and still take a different step, to feel fear and still open the door, because awareness is only the beginning. The rest is repetition, action, practice, truth, not spoken once, but lived again and again, until it replaces the lie so deeply that you no longer have to remind yourself what's real. You simply know, not because you believe, but because you've become. At first, the path is clear, inviting, lined with signs pointing forward, whispering possibility. You feel drawn to it, not because it's easy, but because it feels right, as if it's been waiting for you. You hesitate, you calculate, you imagine what could go wrong. Then you make your decision, you commit, you step forward fully, ready to give everything to this road, and then, inexplicably, it begins to disappear. The signs fade, the direction crumbles. What once felt solid now feels illusory. The path beneath your feet becomes fog. You look back, but the way behind is gone too. You are not where you were, but you are not where you thought you were going either. This is the paradox. The moment you commit to the path vanishes, not as punishment, not as failure, but as transformation, because the path never truly existed until you stepped into it. And once you did, it was no longer a path, it became a life, and life cannot be mapped in advance. What you thought was a road with markers and milestones was really just an invitation to enter the unknown. Committing didn't secure the future. It erased the illusion of certainty you thought you had. You confused clarity with control. You thought choosing would eliminate doubt. You thought stepping forward would guarantee progress. But the truth is far more disorienting. Sometimes clarity arrives only in hindsight, and sometimes the commitment itself removes the very guidance you were relying on. Think of the artist who devotes their life to their craft, only to find that inspiration no longer comes easily once the stakes are real. Think of the person who chooses love fully, finally, and then feels unfamiliar distance as comfort gives way to vulnerability. Think of the one who changes careers, believing they found their purpose, only to stand in a new room and realize they have no idea what they're doing. We are taught that commitment is rewarded with stability, with clarity, with support. But sometimes, commitment is rewarded with silence, with chaos, with disappearance. Not to harm you, but to test you, to ask, will you walk forward even when the signs are gone? Will you trust yourself when the world stops reassuring you? Because before commitment, you had the illusion of endless choice. You could fantasize, stall, change direction. After commitment, there is only forward. And forward is often dark. Not because you're lost, but because you're no longer being led. You've become the one who leads, and that's terrifying, because it means there are no guarantees, no maps, no clear evidence that this will work. Only you, your footsteps, your breath, your will. And if you expect the path to reassure you at every step, you will mistake every moment of doubt as a warning, every silence as a mistake, every detour as proof that you chose wrong. But doubt does not mean you're lost. Uncertainty does not mean failure. It means you've reached the part of the journey where maps no longer apply, where you're no longer following someone else's trail, but carving your own. If you ever feel like everything made sense until the moment you committed, if you feel like the road betrayed you the second you gave it your whole heart, pause. Ask yourself, did the path vanish? Or did it simply stop pretending to be safe? Because maybe the disappearance is not the end of guidance. Maybe it's the beginning of trust. Trust not in the path, but in your ability to walk it, in your ability to create it with each step you take. The path that vanished when you committed to it is not a punishment for choosing. It is a transformation of reality, a shedding of illusions. The comfort of clarity disappears so that something stronger can emerge. Conviction. The sense that even without guarantees, even without signs, even without applause, you can still walk. And that is the moment your path truly begins. Not when it's visible, but when it disappears and you walk anyway. Hope begins softly. It starts as a flicker, fragile, tentative, barely there. A whisper that maybe things could be different, better, bearable. You don't dare touch it at first. You watch it from a distance, afraid you might scare it away. But then, slowly, it grows. You begin to reach for it, you nurture it, you build around it plans, dreams, lifelines. You begin to believe it was meant for you. So you grip it tightly, desperately. You hold it so close that you forget how it first arrived. Uninvited, delicate, light as breath. And that's when it begins to die. The paradox reveals itself. Hope, when clutched too tightly, suffocates. It loses the freedom that made it beautiful. It becomes rigid, demanding, a weight instead of a wind. What was once a possibility becomes a requirement. What was once a dream becomes a condition. And the more tightly you hold it, the more fragile it becomes. You begin to need it to unfold a certain way. You can't imagine any version of the future without it. And so, every moment that doesn't align perfectly with that vision becomes a threat, a betrayal, a loss. Hope, once expansive, turns into fear. You stop living in wonder. You start living in anxiety, trying to protect the hope from any outcome that doesn't match the story you've wrapped around it. And when life, in its unpredictability, shifts away from your script, your hope, once alive, begins to crack. Not because life is cruel, but because you confused hope with control. You thought holding it tighter would make it safer, but you forgot. Hope isn't something to be gripped. It's something to be trusted. Think of the lover who falls in love with the idea of forever and becomes so terrified of losing it that they squeeze the relationship into submission and lose it anyway. Think of the artist who once created from joy until hope turned into expectation. And the process, once free, became suffocating. Think of the person who dares to dream of healing, but demands it unfold perfectly, quickly, without discomfort, and feels like a failure when it doesn't. Hope can turn into a weapon, not against others, but against yourself. You begin to measure your worth by how close you stay to the outcome you imagined. You don't just hope for peace, you need it. You don't just wish for success, you require it. And when reality veers off course, you don't adapt, you collapse. Because your hope wasn't a light anymore, it was a cage. If you ever find yourself panicking at the thought of losing your dream, if you feel like you've built your entire self around a single outcome, pause. Ask yourself, am I honoring hope? Or am I imprisoning it? Is my vision still alive? Or have I drained it of all breath by needing it too much? Because real hope doesn't demand. It trusts. It allows. It breathes. Real hope survives disappointment. Not because it avoids pain, but because it's rooted deeper than a single version of the future. It believes something good is still possible, even when this version falls apart. It's not passive, it's powerful, but it does not beg, and it does not break when life takes a different shape. The hope that died, the moment you held it too tightly, is a warning. That even the most beautiful belief can become poison when we wrap our fear around it. That clinging, no matter how noble its intention, strangles what it tries to protect, but it's also a lesson in surrender, a reminder that the best things grow in openness, not in grasping. That hope, true hope, requires space, room to unfold, room to change form, room to surprise you, So loosen your grip. Let the hope breathe. Let it evolve. Let it become something wilder, freer, and more honest than the version you tried to sculpt by force. Because the real hope worth having isn't the one you control. It's the one that lives, even when you let go. It looked like an ordinary mirror, smooth glass, silver backing, the quiet stillness of reflection. But when you stood in front of it, something felt wrong, or maybe too right. Because the person looking back wasn't quite you. Not yet. They had your face, your posture, your eyes. But something had shifted. Their gaze held more certainty, their shoulders more ease, their presence heavier with truth you hadn't yet earned. You realize, slowly, that what you're looking at is not who you are, but who you are becoming. The paradox emerges instantly. The mirror shows you a self you haven't become yet. But the moment you try to match it, it changes. You reach for that version. You make choices to align with it. You shift your posture, your patterns, your words. But it always stays one step ahead, morphing slightly, becoming something just out of reach again, not to mock you, not to deceive you, but because the future self cannot be chased, only grown into. And growth is not imitation, it is transformation. You begin to realize, the more you try to become the person in the mirror, the more you betray your own becoming. Because becoming isn't about performance. It's not about copying some imagined final form. It's about shedding what doesn't belong, about making space for something that's not here yet, something that can only arrive through experience, not intention. This mirror doesn't reward control. It rewards surrender. And that's terrifying because we are taught to sculpt our identities, to decide who we want to be and work backward from that image. But this mirror refuses to be part of that game. It doesn't reflect aspiration. It reflects possibility. And possibility by nature is unstable, shifting, uncertain. If you try to define it too quickly, you kill it. You reduce it to something small enough to hold, but too small to change you. This is the trap. You see your future self and assume your job is to replicate them, but your real task is to evolve until their reflection naturally appears, to live into that version, to stumble, bleed, fail, and keep walking until your posture aligns with theirs, not by mimicry, but by growth. And here lies the most haunting part. You never actually meet that version, because by the time you arrive, they've changed again. They've stepped forward. The mirror has moved. The self you saw was only a glimpse, a flash of who you might be if you keep choosing truth over comfort, presence over performance, curiosity over control. This paradox is not just philosophical, it is deeply psychological. We are constantly projecting future selves, idealized, versions based on who we think we should become. But the danger is this. If you fall in love with the projection, you might abandon the path that actually leads to your becoming. You might prioritize looking like that person instead of learning how to deserve their posture. You might skip the discomfort, the vulnerability, the shadow work, and in doing so, you become a reflection of a reflection, hollow, polished, performative, instead of someone who earned their presence by living it fully. If you ever find yourself haunted by the gap between who you are and who you want to be, pause, ask yourself, am I chasing a reflection or walking a path? Am I performing the future or creating space for it to become real? Because the mirror doesn't lie, but it also doesn't wait. It offers you a glimpse and then asks, will you live a life that earns this face? Not by force, but by becoming the kind of person who no longer needs the mirror to see their truth. The mirror that showed who you were about to become is not a promise. It is a test, and the only way to pass is to stop chasing the image and start becoming the person who no longer fears the reflection. You approach the puzzle like any other challenge. You think it's something out there, something to be conquered, decoded, assembled, a riddle to sharpen your thinking, test your resolve, or maybe just pass the time. You begin to work on it, piece by piece, edge to center, clue to solution, and then something strange happens. The puzzle doesn't get harder. You begin to change. You feel your focus shifting, your thoughts rearranging. You're not just solving the puzzle anymore. You're being drawn into it. You start asking different questions, not about the puzzle, but about yourself. Why do I want to finish this? Why does this pattern feel familiar? What am I really trying to prove? The more you work on the puzzle, the more it starts working on you. This is the paradox. You thought the puzzle was the object, but you were the one being solved. The structure, the challenge, the problem, it was a mirror, not of your intellect, but of your assumptions, your control, your identity, because the puzzle never really existed to be completed. It existed to reveal something about the way you complete things. Do you rush to finish it, obsessed with resolution? Do you give up when it doesn't come easily? Do you seek help or isolate yourself deeper in frustration? Do you treat it as a test of worth or a place to play? Every piece you place down says something about you. Every strategy you use exposes a pattern in how you relate to uncertainty. And the more time you spend trying to understand the puzzle, the more the puzzle gently turns the light back on you. You thought you were in control, but you were the one being deconstructed. And here's where it gets stranger. You start to feel that you need to finish it. Not just to win, but to complete something inside yourself. As if your identity has now fused with the process. You begin to measure your value by whether or not you can crack the code. The puzzle becomes a reflection of your unresolved wounds. It no longer says, "Figure me out." It says, "Figure yourself out, or stay stuck." But the puzzle doesn't give you easy answers, because it was never built for answers. It was built for confrontation. The longer you sit with it, the more it pulls you apart. It makes you uncomfortable. It shows you your impatience, your fear of failure, your need for control, your deep craving for something to finally make sense. You realize this isn't just a test of intelligence. It's a test of surrender, because the puzzle isn't asking to be solved. It's asking if you can sit with something unfinished, uncertain, unsatisfying. It's asking if you can be whole without everything being complete. And that question doesn't have a piece you can just slot into place. If you ever feel consumed by something you were just trying to understand, a relationship, a goal, a theory, a dream, pause. Ask yourself, am I still solving the puzzle? Or has the puzzle started solving me? Am I still exploring the thing? Or am I being undone by the version of myself that it reflects? Because sometimes what we think is a problem to be solved is actually a doorway into the parts of ourselves we've been avoiding. And the more we resist, the more we try to force a solution, the louder the puzzle gets, not to confuse us, but to confront us with what's real. The puzzle that solved you, instead, is not about winning. It's about awakening. It's a reminder that some challenges are not designed to be conquered, but to change you, to unmake the rigid identities you bring to them, to humble the part of you that thinks understanding means control, to teach you that sometimes sitting with uncertainty is the deepest form of wisdom. And when that happens, when you let go of needing to finish it, when you stop treating the puzzle as a test, you begin to change. Not because the puzzle is finished, but because you are no longer the same person who started it. And maybe that was the solution all along. Regret is supposed to fade. We're told that time softens it, that growth rewrites it, that the right choices made afterward can somehow cancel out the wrong ones that came before. You make a mistake, you reflect, you change, you fix what you can, and yet, instead of healing, the regret deepens, not weaker, stronger, more persistent than before. Every time you try to correct it, it finds new ground to haunt. You revise your life, thinking it will bring closure, but instead, it sharpens the memory of who you used to be. This is the paradox. The more you try to correct the past, the more clearly you see what it cost you, and the clearer it becomes, the more the regret grows. Correction brings wisdom, but wisdom reopens the wound. Because now you're not just someone who made a mistake. You're someone who knows better, but only after the moment where it could have mattered. The haunting begins there. You think, if I had just been who I am now, then none of that would have happened, but you weren't. You were who you were. With the limits, the blind spots, the needs, the ignorance of that time. And here's the cruel twist. Your growth, your correction, makes the regret deeper because it illuminates what could have been. Had you known then what you know now, you're not trapped by the event, you're trapped by the awareness that it could have been avoided now. But now is too late. The window is closed, and that awareness breeds a special kind of suffering. You see your past self like a stranger. You want to shake them, warn them, protect them from themselves. But they can't hear you. They are moving forward with the certainty of someone who doesn't yet know what they'll break. And you are left watching, knowing exactly when the fracture happens. This paradox shows up in the smallest places. Apologizing years later, only to see the pain still lingering in the other person's eyes. Breaking a toxic pattern, only to realize how long you let it fester. Becoming someone better, only to feel like the old version of you burned bridges that now can't be rebuilt. And so regret clings to the progress itself. You improve, but instead of being proud, you feel late, and that lateness haunts you. It whispers, you should have gotten here sooner. You could have spared them. You could have spared yourself. But here's the deeper truth. You couldn't have. Not because you weren't trying, but because you hadn't yet become the person who could try. We like to believe that if we care enough, we'll get it right, but growth doesn't move that way. It doesn't arrive when it would be most useful. It arrives only when you're ready to carry its weight, and that readiness often comes too late to undo the damage. If you ever feel crushed by regret that seems to grow with every correction, pause. Ask yourself, am I punishing myself for not knowing something I had no way of knowing at the time? Am I expecting my old self to carry the wisdom that only pain could deliver? Because that's the trade-off. Pain teaches, regret refines, but they do so only after the moment where their lessons could have changed the story. This doesn't mean the correction is meaningless. It means it's honest, because you're not fixing the past. You're breaking the cycle that the past tried to trap you in. You're becoming the person your younger self couldn't be. So the future version of you won't repeat the same mistakes. The regret that grew stronger with every correction is not proof of your failure. It's proof that you're awake, that you are no longer sleepwalking through your choices, that you are now someone who understands the weight of what you once carried too carelessly. And that matters. It matters more than perfection. So stop trying to erase the regret. Let it sit beside you, not as punishment, but as witness, not as a scar to hide, but as a teacher to honor. Because the depth of your regret is not the measure of your guilt. It's the measure of your capacity for growth. And that capacity is the only reason any of this still hurts. You wake up with tears on your face. Your heart is racing. The room feels too quiet, too still. You try to piece together the fragments of what just happened, but it wasn't real. It was a dream. And yet, it lingers with more weight than most of your waking life. The place felt familiar. The people, known. The loss, real. The love, devastatingly honest. You carry the feeling with you into the day. It stains your mood. It colors your thoughts. It settles into your memory, like something that actually happened. But it didn't. And yet you remember it. You remember the sensation of being there. You remember the pain, the joy, the conversation. You remember a version of yourself that never truly existed, in a moment that never took place. This is the paradox. The dream created a memory you never lived, and somehow it feels just as real as the ones you did. Your mind cannot always tell the difference, because memory isn't made of facts. It's made of emotion, and dreams are emotional truth machines. They bypass logic and speak in symbols, primal, vivid, intimate. They reach places your conscious mind can't, and in doing so, they leave behind impressions that settle deep in the psyche, as if they belong to a life you actually lived. Sometimes, you remember a face you've never seen, a child that felt like your own, a loss so profound that waking up feels like resurrection. And for the rest of the day, or even the rest of your life, that unreal event becomes part of your inner landscape. It shapes your behavior. It influences your desires. It tugs at the edges of your sense of self. And yet, you have no shared timeline to place it in, no photos, no witnesses, no date or documentation, just the feeling and the echo. You begin to ask, if I remember it, if I felt it, if it changed me, does it matter that it never happened? Maybe the question isn't whether it happened. Maybe the question is, what is memory, if not the residue of experience? And if dreams can leave residue, then aren't they real in some meaningful way? Here's the trap. You try to dismiss it. You tell yourself, it wasn't real. Get over it. But that invalidates the part of you that still aches from it, the part that loved something inside that dream so much it refuses to let it go. You can't grieve it publicly. You can't tell someone, I miss a life I only lived in my sleep, because it sounds ridiculous, unstable, melodramatic. But it isn't. It's profoundly human. It's the mind doing what it always does, crafting meaning, weaving story, making emotion into architecture. And sometimes it does that without your permission, without chronology, without consent, just because it needed to. The dream might have shown you something you needed to feel, a truth you were avoiding, a loss you haven't faced, a version of love you didn't think you were allowed to want. It might be grief from a life unlived, or a gift from a version of you that still exists in some forgotten corridor of your subconscious. Or maybe it was just a dream. But even just a dream can leave you marked. Because consciousness is not bound by time, and emotion doesn't care about facts. If you ever find yourself haunted by something that never technically happened, pause. Ask yourself, why does this memory matter to me? What did it show me that my waking life hasn't? And what part of me is still living inside it? Because sometimes the dream gives you something too sacred to discard, even if it never took place on a map you can point to. The dream that created a memory you never lived reminds us, reality is not defined solely by what is visible, it's defined by what shapes us. And if something invisible, intangible, unprovable, like a dream, can leave behind a scar or a light or a longing, then maybe we need to stop dismissing what wasn't real. Because if it changed you, it's part of your story now. You make a choice, a new direction, a single yes or no that seems to belong solely to the present moment. And yet, everything before it changes. The memories rearrange themselves. The meaning of old events is rewritten. What once felt like failure now feels like preparation. What once seemed random now appears destined. A new path emerges in your memory, one that wasn't visible until you decided to take this step. This is the paradox. Sometimes a decision in the present reshapes your past. Not the events, but the meaning behind them. And meaning is everything. Your history becomes a story, but not a fixed one. It bends. It folds itself around the shape of who you're becoming. A heartbreak you once called pointless becomes the thing that cracked you open just enough to let the next love in. A job you thought was a detour becomes the thing that gave you the skill to survive now. A moment of weakness becomes a necessary shadow in the light of the choice you just made. The events didn't change, but you did. And in changing, you rewrote the lens through which those events are remembered. This is not imagination. It's cognitive reconstruction. Memory is not a hard drive. It's a living story, updated in real time based on the emotions and narratives you carry now. When you shift who you are, you don't just change the future. You change the why of your past. And that change can be more powerful than any resolution, because it doesn't erase what hurt. It reframes it. It says, maybe that pain was the path. Maybe that failure was the foundation. Maybe that version of me didn't fall behind. Maybe they lit the trail I'm walking now. It sounds like magic, but it's memory, and memory is magic. It is not built to be accurate. It is built to be useful. And what could be more useful than realizing that the worst things you've lived through might have made this version of you possible? But here lies the danger. If you choose passivity, if you choose numbness, avoidance, the safety of never deciding, your past remains locked. In its old meaning, you become the victim of your own story. You live in a chronology you didn't shape. But when you choose, when you change, when you act, the story rearranges itself in real time. Suddenly, you see that everything before this moment was pointing here. Even the detours, even the collapses, especially the collapses. And yet, this power can feel unbearable because it forces you to admit something radical. You are not just the product of your past, you are its co-author. And that means you can no longer blame the story for where you are. It means the same pain that broke you can become the frame that holds you together, if you choose to see it that way. If you ever find yourself asking why it all had to happen the way it did, if you're drowning in the injustice or randomness of your past, pause. Ask yourself, what if this decision I'm making now is the thing that gives my past a new meaning? What if nothing before this was wasted, only waiting to be rewritten by the self I am now becoming? Because the past is not dead, it is elastic, and your choices now pull its threads into new patterns. The decision that rewrote your past before it happened is not about changing facts. It's about reclaiming authorship. It's about realizing that you are not just a character in this story. You are the narrator too. And that means that no matter how far off course you've gone, no matter how lost the timeline feels, you are still allowed to give your story a point. Not a perfect one, not a neat one, but one that lets you say, it mattered, I matter. And I choose to believe that this is going somewhere worth being. You hold a belief, quiet, firm, deeply rooted. Maybe it's about yourself. Maybe it's about the world. Maybe it's something you don't say out loud, but it drives you in every room you enter. You tell yourself, I'm not good enough. Or, people always leave. Or, I'll never succeed unless I suffer for it. And then, something strange happens. Life gives you evidence that this belief is false. You succeed. Someone stays. You are told you are enough. By results, by love, by truth. But instead of letting the belief die, it gets stronger. It doubles down. It mutates. You say, they stayed, but they'll leave eventually. I succeeded, but it was a fluke. They love me, but only because they don't see the real me. The contradiction doesn't weaken the belief. It fortifies it. This is the paradox. Some beliefs survive not because they're true, but because they've learned how to turn every piece of disconfirming evidence into proof. You're not defending the belief. The belief is defending itself. It doesn't care about truth. It cares about consistency. It wants to survive, not because it serves you, but because it's familiar, and familiarity feels safe, even when it hurts. This isn't stubbornness. It's a function of the brain. Cognitive dissonance theory tells us that when confronted with evidence that contradicts a deeply held belief, we don't always adapt. We rationalize. We bend reality. We adjust the story to keep the belief alive, because letting go of it would mean letting go of a version of ourselves we've been living inside for years. And letting go of self, any self, feels like death, especially when that self was built for protection. Because these beliefs didn't form out of nowhere. They formed in moments of pain, confusion, betrayal. They formed as defense mechanisms, as explanations for chaos. You told yourself, it happened because I wasn't enough, not because it was true, but because it gave you control. Better to blame yourself than admit that the world is unpredictable, that love is fragile, that good people can leave for no reason. And once that belief solidifies, it becomes the lens. Every experience gets filtered through it. You find patterns where there are none. You dismiss love when it's real. You chase suffering as proof of your worth, and the belief, no matter how false, survives, even thrives. If you ever feel like you're fighting to unlearn something that keeps surviving even though your life keeps disproving it, pause. Ask yourself, what part of me still needs this belief to be true? What chaos does this belief protect me from having to face? Because the belief isn't just a thought, it's a structure. It holds up parts of your identity. It organizes your narrative. It keeps certain truths at a safe distance. And until you are ready to face those deeper truths, the belief will keep surviving every attempt to disprove it. You'll keep walking away from good things. You'll keep expecting the worst. You'll keep mistaking pain for proof that you're on the right path. But here's the twist. The belief is not your enemy. It's your echo, an echo of a version of you that once needed it to make sense of something senseless. So when it shows up, again and again, even in the face of contradiction, don't fight it with shame. Don't crush it with logic. Meet it with compassion. Thank it for protecting you. Thank it for helping you survive. Then gently ask it to rest, because you're not that person anymore. You're allowed to let the belief die, not with violence, but with a funeral. The belief that strengthened each time it was proven wrong isn't proof that you're broken. It's proof that your mind is brilliant at surviving, even if it means holding on to the wrong things for too long. But survival is not the same as living, and at some point, you will be asked to choose between the safety of the story and the uncertainty of freedom. And when you're ready, you'll stop trying to win the argument. You'll simply walk away from it because you no longer need to prove the belief wrong. You've already lived beyond it. At first, the door is wide open, welcoming, maybe even mundane. You don't feel pressure walking through it. You don't sense finality. It feels like a hallway, a transition, something you could reverse at any time. You step through, and then you hear the click behind you. You turn, startled. The door is gone, or locked, or sealed by something deeper than a key. You didn't know it was the moment. You didn't know that decision would become permanent, that this step couldn't be undone. This is the paradox. You never know the weight of a choice until after you've made it. And by then, it's too late to go back. It didn't look like a point of no return, but it was. And now, everything you do must be done without the possibility of retreat. It could be something small. A sentence said in anger, a silence that stretched too long, a goodbye you thought was temporary, or something massive. Leaving the job, ending the relationship, walking away from a version of yourself you spent years building. But in each case, you thought you could circle back, that the door would stay open just in case. It didn't. And the grief of that realization is strange, because it's not about what happened. It's about the fact that you didn't know it would be final. You thought there'd be a chance to return, to explain, to revise, to say one more thing, and there isn't. This is what makes the door so disorienting. It closes not with force, but with silence. Not with a bang, but with an absence. You only realize it's locked when you try to look back, and nothing is there. Memory becomes your only window, and it never gives the full view. You start to ask yourself, had I known, would I have chosen differently? Had I known this was the moment, would I have hesitated? But that question is unanswerable, because the knowledge only exists after the crossing, and so you carry the weight of a door you didn't know you closed. The deeper trap, you can begin to fear every new decision. You hesitate at every threshold, wondering which ones will vanish behind you. You start to crave reversibility. You resist commitment. You cling to what-ifs like lifelines. But life doesn't work that way. Many doors don't announce themselves. They look like regular days, like forgettable moments, like things you'll have time to fix later. And that's what makes them sacred. Not because they were clear, but because they weren't. Because they asked you to choose without knowing the cost. And that, perhaps, is the truest form of choice. To act without certainty, to step forward even when the stakes are invisible. If you ever find yourself haunted by the feeling that you can't go back, pause. Ask yourself, what was I trying to preserve? What did I hope would remain open forever? And more importantly, can I mourn that loss without resenting the person who stepped through the door because they didn't know? They were doing their best with the information they had. They were you before the click. The door that locked only after you walked through. It is not a punishment, it's a mirror. It shows you that every moment contains unknown weight, that every choice is sacred. Not because of what you know, but because of what you don't. And even if you can't go back, you can move forward with more reverence. You can listen harder at the hinges. You can step slower at the thresholds. Not out of fear, but out of respect, because doors don't owe you announcements. And life doesn't wait for you to realize what's already changed. So next time, when you feel the shape of a choice beneath your feet, ask yourself not just what you're stepping into, but what you might be stepping away from forever. You catch your reflection by accident, a passing glance in a mirror, a shadow in a window. And for a moment, something feels off. The face is familiar, but it's not the one you expected. There are lines you don't remember earning, a heaviness in the eyes, a posture that leans slightly forward, as if it's learned to carry things you never noticed piling up. It's you, and yet not. Because inside, you don't feel different. Not really. You still flinch the same way. Still crave approval. Still hesitate before speaking your truth. Still carry the insecurities of someone far younger than this reflection suggests. And that's when the paradox strikes. Your reflection has aged, but you haven't. At least, not in the ways you thought you would. You expected time to grow you into wisdom, into confidence, into clarity. But some parts of you never evolved. They stayed rooted in the moment they were formed, in childhood, in heartbreak, in trauma, in youth. And now, the image in the mirror reveals a fracture. The body moved forward. The face gathered time. But something inside paused. This isn't just sentimentality. It's psychology. The human mind stores unresolved moments not as memories, but as emotional timestamps. The fight you avoided, the love you never grieved, the words you never spoke, they remain frozen. And so, part of you remains stuck, while the rest of you keeps aging. It's why you can feel 15 in a moment of panic, or 8 when criticized, or 17 when you're touched a certain way. Those aren't regressions. They're untouched layers of self. And now, your reflection wears the years. But those younger selves still speak, from behind your eyes. That's the haunting. The paradox deepens when you try to reconcile the two. If I look older, why don't I feel wiser? If time has passed, why do I still carry the same fears? You begin to wonder, have I grown at all? Because the world sees your face. It assumes experience, composure, insight. But inside, there's a disconnect. You're still unsure, still unfinished, still searching. And the reflection becomes not just a reminder of time, but an accusation. A mirror that seems to say, you should be further by now. But here's what the paradox doesn't always tell you. The reflection isn't wrong, but it isn't the whole story either. Yes, time moved. Yes, your body changed. Yes, some parts of you remain suspended. But awareness of the gap is itself a sign of growth. Because those who are truly frozen don't notice the dissonance. They live as if nothing needs tending, as if the mirror always matches. You feel the ache because you've begun to notice what still needs to be healed. You feel the fracture because part of you is finally ready to repair it. And perhaps that's the moment the real aging begins. Not the aging of flesh, but the maturation of soul. The ability to say, I am older than I feel, but I am also wiser than I look. And both can be true. If you ever find yourself staring at a reflection that feels like a stranger, pause. Ask yourself, what part of me got left behind? What version of me still needs to be invited forward? Into this moment, this body, this life. Because the mirror can only show surface. It cannot reveal the timelines tangled inside your chest. And sometimes, the most sacred work is simply catching up to the face you already wear. The reflection that aged, while you stayed the same, is not a condemnation. It's a call to gather your younger selves, to tend to the versions of you that never got to grow, to let them speak, hurt, soften, until they too can age, not in body, but in grace. Some questions come slowly like fog, gradually settling in until you're wrapped in uncertainty. Others arrive like a punch, sudden, sharp, impossible to ignore. You carry them with you. You turn them over in your mind, night after night, like stones in your pocket. They shape the way you see the world, the way you talk to yourself, the way you live. What am I meant to do? Why did they leave? Who am I, really? And then, after days, or weeks, or years, you find the answer. Or maybe it finds you. There's clarity, maybe relief, but also, strangely, a kind of absence. Because the question that once felt so enormous, so central, so defining, is gone. Not because it was satisfied, but because it simply no longer matters. This is the paradox. The moment some questions are answered, they cease to exist. Not only does the answer arrive, but the entire structure of the question collapses. It disappears from your life like a dream you were convinced was real, until you woke up. You don't just move on from it. You forget why it ever consumed you, and that forgetting feels strange, almost unsettling, because part of you built an identity around that question. You were the one seeking, the one wondering, the one waiting, and now you aren't. Not because you've transformed, but because the question, once so vital, no longer makes sense. This happens often in grief. You ask, why did this happen to me? Then time moves. You heal in unexpected ways. And one day you realize the why no longer matters. Not because it was answered, but because you've changed shape around the absence or in love. You ask, how will I live without them? And the question is urgent, suffocating. Then slowly, one breath at a time, you do live. And the question dissolves, not answered, but obsolete. The paradox isn't just that the question disappears. It's that it had to exist to shape the person who no longer needs it. In other words, the value of the question was never in the answer. It was in who you became while asking it. You thought the answer was the destination, but it was the question that moved you, that opened doors, that introduced pain, yes, but also growth. And when the question is gone, you feel the absence of something that once defined you. You are free, but freedom comes with a kind of grief. Because who are you now without the search? If you've ever reached the answer to something that haunted you, and instead of feeling triumphant, you felt hollow, pause. Ask yourself, did I want the answer? Or did I want the permission to keep asking? Was the question keeping me lost, or was it keeping me alive? Some questions are not problems to be solved. They are rituals, states of being, and when they vanish, so does the version of you that lived inside them. That's not failure, it's evolution. You will always be a question-shaped creature. You were built to reach, to seek, to wonder. But not all questions are meant to be carried forever. Some are meant to dissolve when their purpose is fulfilled, not with closure, but with quiet. So don't mourn the disappearing question. Don't try to drag it back for comfort. Don't romanticize the ache of uncertainty. Let it go. Because the person you are now is no longer the one who needed to ask. The question that erased itself when answered is a gentle reminder that healing doesn't always look like solutions. Sometimes it looks like absence, a silence where once there was obsession, a stillness where once there was need, and in that stillness, something new is allowed to emerge. Not a new question, not yet, just space. And that space, vast, quiet, full of possibility, is where your next becoming will begin. You're walking down a hallway, dim light, silent walls, and just ahead of you, your shadow, stretching forward, reaching corners before you arrive. It moves first, takes the step before you do, turns the corner before you choose the direction. You pause, but it doesn't. It flickers, twists, moves ahead, like it already knows where you're going, before you do. And this is where the paradox begins. You think the shadow follows you, but what if it leads? What if the parts of you don't control, your habits, your fears, your instincts, are what's guiding your movement, not the other way around? What if your shadow, your unconscious, your repressed, your unresolved, steps before you every time? This isn't metaphor, it's how the psyche works. You tell yourself you're making conscious decisions, but deeper mechanisms are already in motion. Old traumas, learned defenses, internalized stories. You think you decided to avoid the risk, but your shadow, shaped by betrayal long ago, already had you turning away. You think you chose to speak kindly, but your shadow, fearing rejection, softened your voice before you realized. You think you chose them, chose this path, this belief, but your shadow had already selected the familiar outcome. Because familiar means safe, even when it hurts. This is the trap. You think your conscious mind is in charge, but much of your life is shaped by decisions made in the dark, by the part of you that fears the light. And this becomes haunting when you realize the shadow has been leading for years. It got the job. It ended the relationship. It picked the silence over the confrontation. It taught you to survive, but not to feel safe. And the scariest part, you needed it. The shadow doesn't exist to destroy you. It exists to protect you. It formed in moments when you had no power, when pain came too early, when truth was too overwhelming. It stepped ahead to absorb the hit, so you didn't have to. It became the forward scout of your emotional life, walking ahead, checking for danger, pushing you toward what's predictable. But now you're older. Now you want different things. Now you want to change, and change requires movement. But every time you take a step, you notice your shadow moves first. Same patterns, same thoughts, same endings, different day, same ghost. So you ask, how do I walk into a future my shadow hasn't already claimed? The answer isn't to outrun it. You can't. It's too fast, too familiar. It's shaped like your oldest self. And the answer isn't to fight it. It's too clever, too silent. It doesn't show up in arguments. It shows up in patterns. The only way forward is this. Walk with it. Watch it. Talk to it. Invite it closer until it stops needing to lead. Because the moment your shadow stops protecting you is the moment it begins to transform, not into light, but into integration. It stops moving first because it trusts you now. It believes you're ready to walk alone. That's when your steps stop feeling like repetition. That's when you move before the pattern does. If you ever feel like your life is on loop, like your reactions, your relationships, your regrets arrive before you even choose. Pause. Ask yourself, who's stepping ahead of me? Is this really me? Or is this the version of me that once had to be scared to survive? Because the shadow that moved before you did is not your enemy. It's your younger self, armed with instincts instead of wisdom. And when you stop fearing it, you learn from it. You give it language, you give it rest. You stop following ghosts and start becoming someone they no longer need to haunt. Some truths live quietly inside you, not as facts, but as feelings. Visceral, undeniable. You know them not because someone taught you, but because they pulse in your chest like a private rhythm. They may be about who you are, who you love, what you've survived, or what you believe in your bones, even when logic falters. You carry these truths silently, sometimes for years, until one day, you speak. You say the words out loud, and somehow they sound different. They feel smaller, or distorted, or worse, wrong. Not because they were lies, but because something shifted the moment they left your mouth. This is the paradox. There are truths so fragile, so intimate, that speaking them aloud transforms them, sometimes into something they never were. You think expressing your truth will solidify it, clarify it, free you, but instead it fractures. It bends beneath the weight of interpretation, of language, of the listener's gaze. Suddenly, your truth is no longer yours alone. It's an object now, subject to misunderstanding, scrutiny, judgment, even praise, which can be just as disorienting. And so, a truth that once felt pure begins to unravel, or mutate, or feel like a performance. You begin to question it, not because it wasn't real, but because the act of naming it changed the way it lives inside you. This happens in therapy. You speak a wound out loud, and it echoes strangely. You feel exposed, naked, not more understood, but more confused. It happens in relationships. You try to name your love, your fear, your boundaries, and they land crooked, not as intended, not with the force or softness they carried in silence. The spoken word betrays the sacred shape of inner knowing, and you're left wondering, was it ever true, or did I ruin it by trying to share it? But here's the deeper layer. Some truths are designed to be lived, not declared. They are truths of action, of presence, of being. Once translated into words, they lose the subtlety that made them real. They become distorted by definition. Language, after all, is reduction. It shrinks vast experiences into clumsy symbols. You say, "I'm afraid," but that doesn't capture the full-bodied panic, the way your stomach tightens, the way you rehearse a dozen fake smiles before opening the door. You say, "I forgive you," but your cells still carry the betrayal, and your tone betrays the ache you haven't named. You say, "I love you," but the words fall short of the 1,000 unspeakable ways you've already proven it. The truth isn't in the phrase. It was in the silence, in the way your body knew, in the way your choices aligned. But society trains us to believe that saying the thing makes it real, that a truth unspoken is a truth unkept. And so we speak, even when words dilute, even when truth dissolves in the light of articulation. If you've ever said something that was deeply real inside and felt it vanish or weaken the moment you tried to explain it, pause. Ask yourself, was it the truth that changed? Or the container I tried to force it into? Because not all truths want to be shared. Some want to be honored quietly, lived gently, held close. And when you do share them, they require more than speech. They require space, slowness, witness, not reaction. The truth that became a lie, once spoken aloud, is not a failure of honesty. It's a reminder that some truths are too sacred for sound, too large for language, too real to be reduced. They're not meant to be shouted, they're meant to be known. So trust the knowing, even when the words don't land, even when the world misunderstands, even when your voice trembles and the silence afterward feels like doubt. Because the truth, if it was real before you said it, doesn't disappear. It simply returns to where it belongs, deeper than words. You've made it to the end, or at least to the place that calls itself the end. 50 paradoxes, 50 thought forms you weren't meant to escape, 50 knots tied in the fabric of who you are. But you already know this isn't over, because you're still thinking, still questioning, still running your fingers over the cracks that were exposed, wondering which of them were always there and which ones were planted by what you've just heard. This isn't a story with a resolution. It's not a theory that wraps up in a bow. It's not an answer. It's a mirror, held in front of your mind to reveal the shape of what lives behind it. And what lives there is not certainty, not clarity, not peace. What lives there is paradox. You are built of contradiction. You long for freedom, but fear the weight of choice. You crave meaning, but distrust the stories you tell to find it. You want truth, but recoil when it arrives in a form you didn't expect. You are not broken. You are layered, endlessly recursive. A question mark wearing a human face. That is your nature. And if these paradoxes did their work, then something inside you is different now. Not fixed, but shifted. Not solved, but shaken. You may notice it in the quiet moments, in the pause before a decision, in the discomfort that creeps in when things finally make sense. Because now, you know that sense can be a lie, that logic can loop in on itself, that answers are sometimes just prettier prisons. You've seen how freedom can become its own cage, how identity can shatter under the pressure of being named, how truth can dissolve when dragged into the light. You've glimpsed the machinery behind your own thoughts, and found that it doesn't always want you to be free. It wants you to be safe, predictable, legible. But the self that wants to awaken, the one that sat with each of these paradoxes, not to escape them, but to be altered by them, that self is dangerous because it asks, what if I don't resolve this? What if I stop running? What if I let the question remain unanswered and live inside it anyway? That is where transformation begins, not in certainty, but in your capacity to hold what contradicts, to be both gentle and brutal, both knowing and lost, both the dream and the ghost chasing it. And so now, here at the end, you're left with something heavier than knowledge. You're left with awareness, and awareness is a strange companion. It doesn't comfort you. It doesn't wrap its arms around you and say everything's going to be okay. It whispers, everything's already not okay, and you are still breathing, still thinking, still walking through doors that won't open again, still haunted by shadows that move before you do, still dreaming memories that never happened, still becoming someone you won't recognize until much later, if ever. You wanted understanding. You got unease. You wanted closure. You got recursion. You wanted the edge of the map. You got the realization that there is no map, just more terrain waiting to collapse beneath your next question. This isn't meant to scare you, it's meant to free you. Because when you stop demanding that the world make perfect sense, you can finally start to live in it. Not like a mathematician solving for X, but like a poet, surrendered to metaphor, to contradiction, to the ache of knowing that meaning is not found. It is made by you. Each time you choose curiosity over control, each time you let go of the answer and reach for the experience, each time you pause before reacting and ask, what paradox am I standing inside right now? That's the work, that's the freedom, not in escaping the dilemma, but in realizing you are the dilemma, and that is beautiful. So go on, live the question, speak the truth that might dissolve, make the choice that might rewrite your past. Step through the door that might lock behind you, because meaning is not waiting at the end. It's already here, folded into the fabric of your paradox.